Alrighty, it's Friday. We're back from the holiday. I hope everybody had an awesome Thanksgiving. I hope everybody had an awesome holiday. You had all the calories. Daniel, we're back. Holiday
We're
good?
back, baby. Doing good, doing good. Getting over a little bit of a cold, fun, sinusy, 'tis the season sinus infection. So yeah, outside of that, doing really good.
I think most people watching this are probably getting snowed in. It's snowing where you're at, apparently. I've been hearing about that. I was wearing my winter gear because it was 50 degrees the other morning when I had to walk.
Oh, careful now.
Beanie, hoodie, wool base layer, wool like sweatpants, wool socks. It was a crisis. But anyways,
Yes.
we're here, and it's the Friday CUI Hotline live stream. We do it every week. We're streaming on YouTube. We're streaming on LinkedIn. You can find us on cuihotline.org. We got a bunch of awesome questions. Feel free to put the questions in the chat, and then we'll get to them as we get to them. But like always, we'll start out with our weekend review. Daniel, here we are, well into the phased rollout of CMMC. I cannot think of a prime contractor that has not put out a supplier notice of some kind at this point. Yep. The SAM.gov every day has new sources sought, new notices saying, hey, you got CMMC level 1, level 2, level 2 certification all over the world, different components, all kinds of different projects. And people are saying they're going to wait to see what happens. What's going on?
So here's what's crazy. And how do I say this? So in one day, I had a meeting with 3 different construction companies. And 2 of the construction companies were like, gosh dang, we got to do this thing. And the third construction company was, we're going to wait on the market to see what the market does. But we want to do, and the second part of this, but we want to fully comply with NIST. And I was like, okay, so I think maybe there's just a disconnect here of, number one, CMMC is like a thing now, like November 10th, like there's not really just only meeting NIST moving forward. You have to meet NIST, you have to meet FedRAMP, not only because of 7012, but now because of CMMC. You have to meet incident response in 7012. Like, it's like going through this exercise, and you can't have just any score you want. The amount of people I've talked to that are still thinking they can have their regular SPRS score and meet the requirements is actually pretty large. A lot of people don't understand that whole minimum requirement thing for SPRS. And even more importantly, and this is why I hate the SPRS system, is that number one, it doesn't actually bring into scope FedRAMP clouds. So many people were testing to 110 score on incorrect platforms, and really they're in non-compliance. And the other major piece of it is, especially for conditional status for CMMC, they're not in SPRS having a little checkbox, at least that I've seen, saying, I'm not including 5 point, 3 point, or these certain 1 points in the score that I'm submitting. Right? Because here's the thing, like, people just don't know. Like, nobody reads 32 CFR. Nobody reads 48 CFR. Nobody's reading the CMMC assessment process, the CAP. No one's reading these things to know that they're doing things incorrectly. Someone's going in and attesting that they are, and that's the problem. We're going to have a whole new wave. We went and did Summit 7 Live in Dallas, Fort Worth, not too long ago, you and I, Jacob. And a false claims guy was there, and he was like, hey, how do you think like that's going to tick up post CMMC? Because we kind of think it might not with the DOJ. I said 100%. I said, because people are still going to incorrectly attest for 2 reasons. One, they just don't know any better, and there's not good guardrails kind of in place here. And so anyways, it was just kind of one of those things where it's just very like frustrating, where it's like, guys, like, I just wish this has been happening for so long. There's so much content out there for you to consume to do the right thing. Literally a Google search. Jacob, you posted the incredible Wrapped Spotify of like the show being in the top 10% of podcasts.
Yeah.
And it's like,
hey, shout out to the 44 people who the Sum It Up podcast is your #1 podcast in your Spotify playlist. Shout out to you guys.
Yeah, big fans out there.
Man, thanks, Mom.
And so, yeah, anyways, just kind of one of those things where it's people are waiting on the market. Going back to this comment that was made, it's like they're going to wait on the market to see what impact CMMC is going to happen, and that's the problem. Is that
well? Here's my question: people are like, let's wait on the market. And a lot of times the people, well, every time, the people
Yeah.
who are on the call who say, let's wait on the market, aren't on the calls with us with their competitors like the hour before or the hour after. So like,
Right.
where's our backlog right now in terms of kickoff? Like, if you want to know where the market's at, like, it's not like
Yeah.
we're sitting around with nothing to do.
Nope. And that's the thing. It's like, I mean, a couple months to start something in some cases, right? It's like just to start. And we know a ton of implementers that are in the same boat where like you can't just sign a contract and start the next day. CMMC is picking up, and people in your industry, going back to this statement, like this was a construction company. I talked to 2 other construction companies that are like, send the paperwork, we'll sign it today kind of thing. Because they were like, we want to take this seriously because we don't want to miss the boat. Right. And I think that's the interesting tension that we're seeing, is that we're seeing executives being like, no, I want to wait and see what really happens with CMMC. And we have other people that I wouldn't even call them early adopters anymore. They're actually late to the game, that are saying like, no, we have to move now because we're at such risk of losing potential work.
Are you
Like,
an early adopter if we're already in phase 1? Like, can you still be
I
following?
don't think so. I think like when I say like you can be early to CMMC, you can be late, but you can't be on time. Guess what? We're late now.
Right.
Like the early, the on time, even the on time it's gone.
Right.
It's like now the only people coming are late.
What I could see people saying, you know, the first of all, when people say we're going to wait to see what happens with CMMC to comply with DFAR 7012, that's the reason why CMMC was created, just so you know, is that
Yes.
people won't comply unless there is a threat of external assessment and consequence, right? So I
100%.
could see people saying, well, we want to be smart here. We looked at our customers' procurement acquisition lead time. We looked at their long range acquisition forecast. We're not planning on bidding on something until Q4, and we don't think that's going to be awarded until Q2 of 2027. So
Yep.
you have a long ramp up time to space out your implementation and to schedule your assessment way, way out. That's very different from people being like, I don't think it's happening. We're just going to wait. And that's why I always encourage people is like, don't let us sell you on when you should do it, because we're just going to tell you exactly what the rules say. If you want to know how to game it specifically, or if you even can, look at your customer's long range acquisition forecast, which is everything that they plan to solicit in the next 12 months. And if you're like, yeah, we have to win this thing in Q1, you're out of time and you got to start right now. Q2, Q3, even, it's like you got to start right now. And if you've got a long period of time, it is cheaper to start now than it is to wait and then go quickly. So I think that usually helps people. So if you're out there listening and you don't know, hey, how do I get the buy-in? How do I do this? How do I do that? That generally can help, is saying, this isn't us telling you, you got to start right now. It's customer says this, it takes this long to get ready. This is what the plan is, blah, blah, blah. Everything always takes longer than you think, right? Daniel Kahneman won like a Nobel Prize for telling people that your plans take longer than you think. So just be aware. But yeah, waiting on the market's always very interesting because like we literally can't hire people fast enough to handle the workload. So the market is not waiting for you.
Hey, I will say this for all the companies that have either early adopted or in process right now and like moving forward with CMMC, good on you. I can tell you right now, the reason the market's going to consolidate so much, yes, it is a financial burden. Not even burden. It's a financial requirement to do this if you want to continue to do work in the DoD. But there's so many people that are either waiting or deciding to get out that there's going to be a lot more work open up. So if you're a sub, call your prime today and say, this is my timeline to get certified. This is my timeline to a perfect score. This is my timeline, because I guarantee you they have people falling off left and right now because I'm talking to those people that are deciding not to do anything.
Yeah. I think we were talking this morning, there was a sources sought in SAM.gov for an Air Force project in Wyoming. I think it's like Global Strike Command. They have a bunch of things that they want people to work on. And the line in the sources sought was, vendors are required to have CMMC Level 2 certification and SPRS prior to receiving any CUI drawings. CUI drawings will be provided after CMMC Level 2 certifications are confirmed. If that's your market, what are you waiting on, right? So that's straight from the horse's mouth. All righty. This was a very interesting sentiment that we had on a call this week. We talked to companies that have no internal resources, no idea what's going on. We talked to companies that have a ton of internal resources, very mature teams, very mature systems. But sometimes what will end up happening is even a company that is set up to handle what they're doing doesn't have the extra bandwidth to take on the new work or to manage this specific type of work. That actually seems to be pretty common, even in companies that have pretty decent IT teams. It's like, we would have to hire an extra person for this or an extra 2 or 3 people. It's just cheaper to outsource it, right? The business case is just usually cheaper. You've given many, many presentations on this. But the way that it was phrased in this call, they were tracking what was going on.
Yeah.
They know all the levels. They knew what was up. They've had a plan. They're implementing. Like, I was pretty impressed with what they were doing. And they were like, we just can't clone our guy. Like, we can't find another one of these guys. And he's already working too much. So that's why they reached out to us. What have you seen with this in the past of people who they already have a resource or 2 or more, and they can't clone their people? Like, how does that play into a situation? Because I think a lot of times the ones that get the attention are like, we have no idea what's going on, total blank slate, no money, no people, no nothing. But that isn't always the case, right?
Well, and the hard part is like that single IT guy is also typically managing a larger enterprise environment, right? Especially if you're working with a larger team, or they have to manage the corporate network, right? And so it's kind of 2 different categories. If you're doing an enclave in a separate environment, like now you have 2 different environments to manage. And one IT guy managing one is a lot, let alone managing multiple, 2 different standards potentially, right? Your corporate security might be different than the CMMC boundary. And so the cloning thing, what we've seen, and I think Ryan said this a lot, is like people that know CMMC right now, they're making a lot of money. If you have CMMC on your resume, if you have it on LinkedIn, if you're active in the community, like I get asked all the time, Daniel, do you know anybody, right, that knows this stuff? Marrying the technical and the compliance. It's such a unicorn type person,
right?
That if you say that you have an IT guy that's gotten you compliant, Ryan says this all the time, is like, if you turn around, his chair is going to be spinning because he just took a job at Lockheed making $250,000.
Or we're going to hire him.
Or we're going to hire him, right? Yeah. He's going to end up making so much money. And so that's the thing is that
we've had people do this from us, which we love it when this happens, right? We've had people on our team, hyper technical people who have been blending the compliance and the technical work for a long time. And, big clients have poached them in the past, and they're like running their entire GRC program for big contractors at that point. And we can't even keep them. So I love how Ryan Bonner says this all the time. He's like, if you find somebody that you can afford who can do all of this, they're not sticking around.
Nope. And that's the hard part, is like, you can't clone the IT guy. You need to treat the IT guy. You need to buy him lunch every day. You need to be throwing that fat bonus check around. It's Christmas. You need to be treating that individual, or maybe it's a few, like as best as you possibly can, because the lift to do something like this is not trivial. And I think that gets lost in translation, right? CMMC is just a cybersecurity thing. We're already doing cybersecurity, right? That kind of narrative and response. It's like, well, you have CrowdStrike deployed, sure, but it's like, you don't have any incident response plans. You don't have like true maintenance schedules of when you're doing things. You don't do change control. You don't, you don't do vulnerability or risk assessments. And so it's like you are doing cybersecurity because you did buy a tool, but that doesn't have any sort of alignment out of the box with CMMC per se. You know what I mean? Like in full coverage perspective. So I think that's the hard part too, is like, I know I'm preaching to the choir for people probably watching this stream, but executives are kind of tuned out to the actual lift and burden this takes. So if you have a small team, don't take them for granted. If I literally had someone message me this morning saying, I'm still trying to get leadership to approve CCP classes, right? CCA classes. It's like, I'm still trying to get that to happen. It's like, give that to them, help them make you successful in whatever way you can. Because if not, there's so many opportunities out there for them to go and get a new job somewhere. And I'm not doom and gloom here. I'm just saying, now that CMMC is a reality and not just a theory for the world, the demand for these types of people are going to grow exponentially. So you can't clone your guy, but you can support your guy or gal to the best of your ability, and just know that they are valued in your organization.
Absolutely. All righty. Let's see here. How extensive is the FCI category, buddy?
Great question.
When you find out, please let everybody know, because it has been so frustrating over time to watch the government have basically a definition of everything that FCI isn't, without actually being able to point to anything that FCI is. There's no marking requirements for it. The guidance on it is very, very open-ended. They say anything non-public received from the DoD or generated by the contractor that is not CUI is a lot of information. Yeah, it is a lot of information. What is it? It's let's see. Oh, you got it right here. Yeah.
Yep.
Not intended for public release, which is really the big part. Provided by or generated for the government under a contract to develop or deliver product or service, but it doesn't include information that should be public or simple transactional information as necessary to process payments. So yeah, it's a monstrous category of information. It's basically everything. I think the way that NARA, I'd have to find the old blog from like 2020. I think the way they phrased it was like, all CUI that you handle is FCI, but not all FCI is CUI. And that was basically the big delineation that they made. So yeah, essentially just by virtue of being a government contractor, 99% of the information that you're going to handle has the basic requirements in FAR 52-204-21, which is why it's a FAR wide clause and not just a DoD wide clause. But yeah, it's extremely broad. No one, it's basically one of those things where the government's always like, we know it when we see it, kind of a thing, but we can't actually give you a solid definition. Hopefully when the FAR CUI final rule comes out next year, we get a better clarified definition, because I know that, of the few public comments that were submitted on that rule, a lot of people were like, what is this? So yeah, it's very, very broad.
Yeah, and the other side of this is going back to what you were saying. This is an existing clause, right? FAR 52-204-21 has the exact same alignment with CMMC requirements. That's not accidental, right? So even people thinking that they can kind of get out of CMMC because they don't have CUI, CMMC level 1 is still there. I mean, Jacob, you probably look at sam.gov every day now. You used to look at rulemaking and OMB.
Man, it is so refreshing to check sam.gov instead of the OMB dashboard every day.
And you could just look and see that CMMC level 1 is cranking out. So anything with a FAR 52 clause, 204-21 equals CMMC level 1. And
yeah, I mean the question is like, the question is like, which ones are going to need CMMC level 2 certification and when, and that's like the big question. But it's table stakes at this point that you're going to do CMMC level 1, because I can't think of a situation that would be relevant to anyone who would watch this podcast where you would neither have DFAR 7012 apply to you or FAR 52-204-21 apply to you. That would only exist in situations where you just don't work with the government, at which point, like and subscribe if you're interested in working with the government in the future, but this isn't really for you. Yeah, very, very broad category. Let's see here. I actually don't know what the current guidance on this is. How old are the records that assessors normally look for to verify compliance? 6 months, 12 months, everything since the last internal audit. I don't know what the rule of thumb is at this point. It's going to be a handful of months, ideally, but obviously different environments are different ages. I don't know if you've heard from our assessments recently, Daniel.
So it kind of depends, right? So at a minimum, assessors want to see an annual review of your SSP, right? At a minimum, for incident response, they want to know how often people were reviewing logs. So it's one of those things where, yes, you can have the retention of logs, and assessors want to see things like that, but they also want to see, based on the duration of time you said you're doing these things, they want to see timestamps, if you will, of that actually happening, right? And I think that's kind of the interesting piece is like CMMC doesn't have log retention requirements for how long they want you to go back, right? I mean, DFAR 7012 says they want, you have 72 hours. They can look back as far as 90 days. So we typically see that as a minimum.
Well, so the thing about DFAR 7012 that trips people up is you have to keep your logs that you have for up to 90 days. So if you only have a week of logs, you don't have to have 90 days of logs. Although this is just one of those things where it's like, if you want to have an incident response or cleanup or anything be effective at all, you need visibility into what happens. So you need the logging. 90 days is a good rule of thumb. But if you only have 24 hours of logs, currently the requirements are just keep the 24 hours that you have for up to 90 days.
Interesting. So that's good to know, right? Like it's one of those things where because of the fund regulations, they don't, again, set minimums. They just say we need this up
Well, it's
until.
just another example of the government's naivety of assuming that companies of their own rational self-interest would, of course, keep extensive logs for incident response. Back in 2015, 2016, they didn't think that they would need to make people maintain logs because, of course, you're maintaining logs. If you're not maintaining the logs and something happens, you're screwed. And then
Right.
as
What
it
you gonna
turns
do?
out, people were like, how long do I need to keep the logs? Exactly. Oh, I don't?
Yeah.
Well, then I'm not doing it. And the government's like, okay, we're the unreasonable ones here. So now in 171 Rev 3 in the future, they may define that as an organizationally defined
Yep.
parameter, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with the CMMC revisions in the future.
So the recommendation here, retain evidence of you doing the things during the durations of times that you're stating in your SSP is the really, really big takeaway here. 6 months, 12 months, like I haven't seen a minimum requirement that they're wanting to see for you to like look over security logs, but they are want to say, like, if you say I review it every week, they're going to want to see records going back, you know, some amount of time, again, somewhat undefined, but it's
Months,
like,
yeah.
yeah. Some assessors say 30 days because they don't want you to build an enclave and
Right.
then nobody use it. And you just have this document saying, oh, but we are
There's
going to
also
do
nothing
this.
that says that you have to have it up and running for a year before you're,
Right.
going to do anything. So, be reasonable and vet your assessors. If they come in and they're like, we want to see 18 months of logs, you're like, all right, I'll call you back.
Yeah. I would probably on the safe bet look for 30 days worth of records of you doing the things you're saying that you're doing, right? Just to hedge any bets, hedge any questions that you are operating in this environment based on what your SSP says.
Yeah. We'll dig into it and see kind of what the current guidance is. I can't remember. We said the other day we've had, one, we're over 60 level 2 clients at this point, but it's more than 15 C3 PAOs. So it's not like we're doing 1 or 2 C3 PAOs for all of our clients. We had a bunch of different C3 PAOs. Yep. So we'll go back and ask and see what the rule of thumb is. All right. Rich says, how did these checkbox systems really work in the past? How would this be different for real? Maybe Rich, if you're still there, maybe clarify if by checkbox system, do you mean the regulatory setup that we're dealing with? Or do you mean something else? So if you mean like the existing set of contract clauses that impose cyber requirements in the past, if you're saying that's a checkbox, the only check that exists, there was only one check on the checkbox, and it was, do you accept the terms of this contract? And people, by accepting the terms of the contract, were attesting to the government that they were complying with everything in FAR 52, 20421, everything in DFARS 252, 204, 7012, if they are a defense contractor specifically. And that was it. Back in 2018, 2016 timeframe, the government, even though they were experiencing big data, security incidents, were specifically asked, do you want some third-party verification? Do you want some assurance over these requirements? And the DoD explicitly said, no, we do not want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. Fast forward through a bunch of history, and now here we are.
Sure.
The thing the DoD said they explicitly didn't want to do is now the CMMC program, because that checkbox didn't work. Now, if you're referring to the audit process or the assessment process as checking boxes, that's where I'm going to take an issue with you, because
what you got on your bookcase there, Jacob?
We're still in the middle. We're still in the middle of the office remodel, so my bookshelf is in disarray. The Checklist Manifesto is an excellent book, because for some reason in the security community, we use the term checklist and checkbox like as an epithet, as if it's a bad thing. Do you know who uses checklists? Brain surgeons. You know who uses checklists? Commercial airline pilots. You know who uses checklists? Incident responders. Playbooks are just checklists, everybody, but that's we don't really want to talk about that around the Thanksgiving table, right? So there's nothing inherently wrong with checklists, because it makes sure you're not forgetting anything. So if you got some details, Rich, let me know which one of the check boxes you want to talk about. One of them, totally agree. The other one, we can debate it.
Yeah, I think if I were to take it a little bit further, like talking about SPRS submissions, right, where like if you're self-attesting, it's still the checkbox contractually that organization is not lying. Right now, we've seen with false claims and the avalanche of cases probably about to be dropped here over the next few months, that people have been incorrectly attesting. So the only true validation at this point is an independent third-party certification, which is why the DoD is so keen on that for their type of CUI as a requirement throughout this phase rollout. So I mean, that's the other thing, is like we're still heavily reliant on self-attesting, right? For DFAR 7012, for existing defense contracts prior to CMMC, and even new CMMC contracts that have self-assessment. Here's the interesting thing, is that people don't know that they have to have a minimum score for CMMC. So I think they're going to keep their existing SPRS score in there and not think anything of it, and then lose contracts because they didn't meet the minimum requirement because they didn't know any better. But again, it goes back to my earlier statement. I wish SPRS had a couple of additional check boxes saying, hey, you are using FedRAMP compliant clouds. Hey, you are not using these points when scoring your conditional status for CMMC. Just a little bit more guardrails to even more, how do you say this? Like verify, I guess, that people are doing it the right way. They can still lie, right? But Department of Justice, I'm sure, would love a little bit more evidence saying not only you put in a number, you checked all these boxes saying you were doing it, and you were using Microsoft Commercial for your CUI. And they asked you straight up if you were doing, if you were using compliant cloud. So,
well, and
anyway.
I guess just to wrap up on Rich's point here, is it going to be different this time? Here's the big difference. It's a condition of contract award. And so you've got a bunch of people who handle controlled data. They've built a business model that essentially revolves around taking risks with other people's data that the government and the taxpayer would not approve of. And so that entire business model is dependent on continuing to win contracts. So the DoD has said, if you want to continue being in business, which requires our data, you have to do the thing to protect the data that you've said you've been doing all along. That's the reason why it's so controversial. That's the reason why people hate it. That's the reason why it's gotten so much pushback over the years, is because this isn't some checkbox thing. If you don't do it, you're not getting the contract. So there you go. Anyways, Rich was also saying by the market, when we were talking earlier about people are waiting. The market, do they mean to say which proposals would require CMMC? I think that's general. I don't actually know what they mean specifically. I think it's a lot of times they're waiting to see for their specific customer what the requirement is going to be. And, typically the way that I've seen this play out is people are really saying, we're going to wait and see whether we have a third-party assessment requirement or whether we have a self-assessment requirement. And what that's really saying is, if we don't have a third-party assessment requirement, we're probably not going to be committing to this as intensely as we otherwise would. And just as a reminder for everybody, from 32 CFR 170, the CMMC program regulation, there are no waivers for CMMC level 2 self-assessment. And there are still conditional CMMC level 2 self-assessment requirements. So if you're missing too many requirements and you're doing a self-assessment, you still don't achieve CMMC level 2. And if you tell people that you have and you apply and you attest to that over time, you're taking a big risk. You're taking a big gamble. So just be aware.
Yeah, primes are looking at SAM.gov. Subs are looking to their primes to figure out when they need the requirements. Because that's the tricky part here, is like primes will likely require CMMC well ahead of a solicitation, because they have to know what kind of work they can bid on if you're in their supply chain. And that work is geared towards what you support for them. So it's kind of a really interesting and tricky thing. And Jacob, you said it earlier, like every major prime has released some sort of notice of, hey, supply chain, do this thing.
Yeah. And you and I were making a list the other day, and it was Lockheed, Northrop, Raytheon, Boeing, HII, BAE, General Dynamics, L3 Harris, Leidos, and that's just the ones that we had off the top of our head.
Yep. So anyways, that's kind of the interesting thing, Rich, is like there's this interesting dynamic where primes are kind of, how do I say this? They're telling their supply chain to go do this. However, due to the bounds, I saw this in the Northrop memo. It's like, hey, this is not legal advice. Like, we're not lawyers. We're not like forcing you to do this thing. But if you want to keep working with us, you got to go check these boxes, right? Being CMMC. And so, it's interesting to see when primes are going to actually start cutting off portions of their supply chain and vendors because they aren't able to fully attest to these requirements. I mean, we have to realize we're less than a month, and part of that was government shutdown. We're less than a month into the CMMC rollout, and we're already seeing, what do we have, 20, 30 solicitations out there with CMMC requirements?
Yeah, it's
something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's just a lot of noise around what's going on, which is what we were expecting to see. But speaking of the primes, this is relevant to the Northrop memo.
Yeah.
Daniel, you posted about this and it had like 300 likes on LinkedIn.
Crazy.
We just did the podcast on it where we dove into it. So check that out. It came out on Thursday. If you haven't seen this memo, the new timer function means that these are disappearing on me. So we'll have to figure that out afterwards.
Interesting.
So can prime contractors waive CMMC requirements for their subcontractors? No. Prime contractors cannot waive CMMC requirements for their subcontractors. What an awesome feature, StreamYard. Anyways, prime contractors cannot waive the requirements for their subcontractors. Northrop says this explicitly in their memo, that contracting officers and prime contractors, neither of them can waive CMMC requirements. The only people who are going to approve waivers for CMMC requirements are service or component acquisition executives, who are people that you don't interact with. These are people that the primes don't interact with, right? So the program office is going to go to, if they decide that they want to try and get a waiver for the entire contract, not for individual companies, if they want the entire contract to have the CMMC requirements waived, then they have to go to the service or component acquisition executive and their component CIO. So the Navy CIO, the Air Force CIO, there's all this red tape that they have to go through. And then they can get an approval to waive the CMMC requirements. That doesn't remove FAR 52-204-21. It doesn't remove DFAR 7012. The waiver is temporary, meaning that they have to have a plan for when they're going to update the requirements to have the CMMC, assessments in it.
Yep.
They also have to have a plan for what you're going to do in the interim without the CMMC requirements in it. And all of that happens before the solicitation gets published. So if you see a solicitation that comes out and it's got CMMC requirements, it's not getting waived, right? So the waiver would happen before the solicitation comes out. And so at that point, the contracting officer is just getting the guidance from the program office to say, literally in the clause, fill in the blank of what CMMC level is going to be required. They're not in charge of the waiver. And once the primes hear about what's going on, they can't change it at all. And there's even specific guidance, which we've talked about many times, at 32 CFR 170.23, where they talk about application to subcontractors. If your prime contractor requires CMMC level 2 C3 PAO status, they had to go out and get a third-party assessment for whatever their environment is for whatever specific program, and they send you the same covered data to handle in a subcontract, you require CMMC level 2 C3 PAO status. End of story. There's no judgment left up to them. The only way that you can get out of that requirement is if they don't send you the data. So if you're a manufacturer, if you're an architecture or engineering firm, if you're a construction firm, if you're a research university that has a program working directly with the DoD, and that means that you must have the data, then 1 + 1 = 2 at this point. You're going to require the same level, and they can't waive it. So no, they cannot waive it. Check out the podcast for more. Daniel, I think that memo, I think you posted it over Thanksgiving break, right?
Yeah, posted over. I think it got like 60 something repost. I was like, I've never had anything that crazy hit the World Wide Web. So people are tuned into it. But the problem also is they're tuned into the echo chamber, right? A lot of those people are just already are aware of CMMC. It's the people that don't think it's their problem that we're trying to reach to help educate, like, hey guys, like there's a significant corporate risk to not doing this thing. Like somebody just posted up here, LinkedIn user, sorry, we don't have your name, or I can't see your name. How will that be enforced on existing contracts already waived or non-compliant? So how will CMMC basically impact existing contracts? From the language, they'll be able to apply that to option years, so renewals and things like that. There is the ability for task orders to be in scope for CMMC. That's another thing to be aware of. And so a lot of existing contracts will likely remain untouched, right?
Yeah.
The
I mean, they
DoD,
obviously
DoW,
they can go back and modify them, but
yeah,
99.9% of people with existing contracts aren't going to get a contract mod for CMMC in the terms of their contract. This will be for most people out there. It'll be for new solicitations and
yes.
contracts. Now, how your prime decides to interact with you is up to them. But from the DoD's perspective, they're not going to go back and modify a lot of existing contracts. However, rumor time, whoop whoop, rumor mill, like set off the air horns. I heard over the break that some of the primes are being notified that there will be contract modifications for CMMC level 3. And so I don't know when exactly that's going to happen, but this whole Golden Dome, if you're in the missile space, hypersonic space, space-based systems space, if you will, talking to my fellow Southern Californians here, because that's the majority of the DIB industry out here is a lot of space-based systems. Keep your ear to the ground, because of the people who I respect and trust what they tell me from a lot of the major primes are like, yeah, the contract mods might not be a thing for level 2, but they will absolutely be a thing for level 3. So stay tuned for more after the new year. All righty, let's see here.
By the way, I'm putting in chat real quick. It is CMMC Industry Week next week. Feel free to register for your specific industry. It's completely free. And we talk about CMMC and the impacts of that for each type of major supporting vertical that the DoD leverages for their supply chain. Go ahead, Jacob. Over to you.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay, so 171 Rev 3 has been out for over a year. Can you believe it? It's been out for over a year. By the way, everybody, thanks for tuning in. But this is the first holiday. Let's all just remember, this is the first holiday season where we're not waiting on a rule. We're not waiting on a NIST revision. We're not waiting on a memo. We're not waiting on any of that stuff. You might be waiting on a solicitation, but this is the first Thanksgiving to New Year's that I can remember in the last 5 or 6 years that we haven't had a major thing just looming over the holiday season. So kind of nice. Anyways, 171 Rev 3 has been out for over a year. When will the DoD class deviation end? It will end when CMMC is revised to what you would call CMMC 3.0. So when 32 CFR 170 is revised via rulemaking, then they will rescind the class deviation for DFARS Clause 252, 204, 7012. If you don't know what that means, just briefly explain it. The existing center of gravity for cybersecurity obligations for defense contractors is a single contract clause with the number 252, 204, 7012. That contract clause says when you handle DoD's controlled information, you have a bunch of cybersecurity obligations that you have to follow. You have to implement NIST SP 800-171. You got to have some incident response capabilities. You have to put our data into FedRAMP moderate equivalent clouds if you're going to do that, so on and so forth. However, that clause hasn't changed since 2016, and they didn't specify a revision number for 800-171. So when 800-171 went from revision 2 to revision 3, and DFAR 7012 says do the most current revision, people would say, well, now we've got to do Rev 3, except CMMC, when it went through rulemaking the correct way, by the way, unlike DFAR 7012 back in 2016, it specified 800-171 revision 2. So you have assessors who would show up for revision 2. You have contractors complying with DFAR 7012 for revision 3. You got a problem. So how are they going to fix this? They couldn't put DFAR 7012 through rulemaking in time. So they issued what's known as a class deviation. If you just Google class deviation, DFAR 7012, you can find the list by year of every class deviation. These are very common. And it says, disregard the text of DFAR 7012, use the text of this class deviation, and it's exactly the same as DFAR 7012, but it says revision 2 instead of most current revision. And it says this will stay in effect until it's rescinded. And we have heard from the DoD that they are not going to rescind it until CMMC is updated to assess 171 Rev 3. They'll update the class deviation or 7012 clause to say Rev 3, and then we'll go on about our business from there. When will that happen? Not for 18 months at least is what I'm going to say. I would be surprised if it happened next year. They have already started working on this revision to CMC 3.0, if you will. They've put out the ODPs for 171 Rev 3. You know, they've been doing all this work already, so it won't take as long as the original rule. But I'm still going to assume it's going to take a year and a half before we would start to see that issue.
So did I just see something online? Maybe it was Stacy that posted it about them working on like a crosswalk of Rev 3 to CMMC, like level 2, so that you could proactively do Rev 3. I could have completely dreamed that.
No, I think I saw that too. I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, if Stacy, if you're lurking, let us know if that's a plan. So it's not impossible. Obviously, they're not all that different in terms of what you're looking for, but it's the fact that some requirements fall off from Rev 2 to Rev 3, and you'd have to have some backwards management and this and that. If you have the team and the appetite and the time, definitely you can do Rev 3 and then just handle Rev 2. If you are desperate, if you are behind schedule, if you don't really know what's going on, just stick with the tried and true Rev 2, if you will. We're gonna have to write that down. That was really
tried and true Rev 2, baby.
There you go. We're gonna have to come up with a rhyming couplet for all the revisions. But yeah, there's no need to work on Rev 3 until they revise it, unless you really, really want to. I think we've had a handful of clients who have done Rev 3, but they're not your average defense contractor. So, all righty. We need help with policy writing and assessment support in that order. Does Summit 7 help with that problem?
We do. So we offer a service called Commander that will do just that, the creation of that documentation, the updating, the management of it, and then go through your certification with you. Or we have building out the compliance documentation as a standalone one-time project. So gap assessment, policy and procedure creation. If you just want that work, and then we kind of part ways, and then you would go through your assessment on your own. So we have a couple different flavors just depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, we absolutely support it.
Yeah. Let's see here. Somebody said there's a point where you need to realize you are beating a dead horse for those who choose not to do anything. Hey, that horse might be dead. That horse has been dead for years. We're still beating the horse. I get paid to beat the horse, right? That's it's bad for the horse, but that's the job. You know, I can't even tell you. I mean, Daniel, we see this all the time. The most common type of phone call that we get are people who saw our content years ago or who we spoke to years ago who have kept up somewhat with what's going on, but chose for whatever reason, no judgment, to not get started, right? If we had said it once in 2021 and then we had never continued to beat the horse until today, we would be like a lot of our competitors who aren't around anymore, right? So I don't mind beating the horse. You don't mind beating the horse. If we didn't mind beating the dead horse, or if we minded beating the dead horse, then we would have found a different line of work a long time ago. That's just the job. Every day we hear from people who are like, thanks for putting out the content, just found your content. This is the fatal flaw that the DoD has made, is that the number one thing that I have taken away from talking to them is they think that if they say it once and there's no update, they don't need to say it again. And that's not true, right? You have to continuously put out the information, continuously explain it, repeat yourself over and over and over again. And that's the job. So it might be beating a dead horse. I don't care. It's helping people. And, you know, that's what we do.
It's true.
All righty. Let's see here. Okay. If someone wants a waiver, how much time do they have to submit it? Or is just any time before a solicitation goes out? And approximately how many organizations,
that timer thing,
I'm gonna write a letter when we get done with this, and approximately how many OSCs will be granted a waiver? Okay, so here we go. 1, 2, 3, disappear. Okay, if someone wants a waiver, how much time do they have to submit it? You don't. If you want a waiver, you don't submit an application for a waiver. There is no application. There is no one to ask unless you are super buddy-buddy with the program manager, at which case you probably are a very senior person at a very large prime contractor, and you probably don't need to listen to this podcast. There is no one for you to ask for a waiver. That waiver decision is made prior to the solicitation, like we talked about earlier. Program manager asks their component CIO and the service acquisition executive for a waiver. Is it just any time before a solicitation goes out? Yeah, waivers are a pre-solicitation process. How many OSCs will be granted a waiver? Individual organizations are not granted waivers. There is no number of OSCs who are expected to be granted waivers, because waivers are for entire contracts, not for individual contractors. So yeah, there is no number. There is no one to ask. Long story short, much like POAMs exist in CMMC, waivers exist in CMMC, but not to a degree that's really going to help you very much, right? Like POAMs don't exist so that you can delay the cost and implementation of major 5-point controls, right? They exist to, mop up a couple of the 1-pointers that the DoD is okay accepting as not implemented for 6 months, and that's it. Waivers exist, but you are not getting one individually. You probably won't know if one was granted, because the solicitation is going to come out and it just won't have a CMMC requirement in it. And if you work on the other side of the primes, that's probably not going to be communicated to you. They're just going to ask you, when are you getting it? Because even if this one opportunity doesn't have the requirement, a future opportunity is going to have it in it. So it doesn't really matter all that much. Don't count on getting a waiver. I think the subtitle for the episode this week on the podcast was "Ain't Nobody Getting a Waiver."
Ain't no waivers.
Ain't no waivers. All righty, let's see here. All right, quick, before the timer runs out. Will the DoD start enforcing CMMC compliance on foreign defense and their contractors? Yes. How specifically is still being worked out. Some of the C3PAOs that we know have had companies from Korea, Europe, other places reach out to them for their assessments. Just like anybody else, when their current contracts expire and they want to work on a new contract, it's going to have a CMC requirement in it. They got to meet that requirement. There are international C3PAOs. There are domestic C3PAOs that do international work. But yeah, foreign companies who are working on these contracts have to comply with the terms of the contract just like anybody else.
So if you're curious, here's the DoD newly updated FAQs when it comes to different things, and they didn't change this at all. Will CMMC apply to non-U.S. companies? Yes, when CMMC requirements are identified in Department Associations, they will apply to all companies performing under the resulting contract, whether domestic or international. Here's the conundrum here. One of the requirements of CMMC, if you're using cloud providers, is FedRAMP. Does FedRAMP exist outside of the United States, Jacob?
No.
You can potentially buy FedRAMP clouds as international companies, but the standard doesn't, right? So like when you're looking at different platforms, potentially different regions of data centers, like it's a lot harder for an international organization to meet the FedRAMP requirement, especially if you don't have a U.S. presence here. Yeah. Anyway, so little food for thought for some people.
All right. Well, here's one that I can't remember the last time I heard this, but you've heard this a lot, and it just blows my mind every time. So our MSP sold us the wrong licensing. Please help. Daniel, what does that mean? What have you seen? This blows my mind.
Yeah, so this has probably happened to me specifically, like from a conversation perspective, maybe half a dozen times, maybe a little bit more, where somebody will call me up and say, hey, Daniel, my MSP sold me GCC licenses and they need to be GCC high. They thought they sold me GCC high. Here's the crazy thing. They pull up the quote that the MSP sent them that they signed a few months or a year prior, and it says GCC high in it, but all the SKUs are GCC. So here's something really important to understand. Whoa. You have to be in a specific program in Microsoft to get access to the high cloud. Most regular MSPs can sell commercial and GCC licenses. A lot cannot sell GCC high.
Because they're not an AOSG.
Exactly, because they're not in the AOSG program with Microsoft. And so when you're looking at quotes, please ask them, are you part of the AOSG program at Microsoft? Because if they come back and say no, where are they getting their licensing from?
And they'll know, right? This isn't a thing that they
Yeah.
like, they aren't sure if they are. Like, you will know if you're an AOSG as a service
100%.
provider, right? That's a
Absolutely.
really great question to ask. I think we should add that maybe to our like what to ask to vet is like, hey,
Yeah.
we know we need to be in GCC high. Are you an AOSG? If they say no, they literally can't help you.
Yep. And that's the problem is like again, what's crazy is, and I haven't seen the back end of this to see if there's like lawsuits and stuff going on, but they'll come to us and they'll pay again for the licensing that they need. And guess what they also have to pay for? Another implementation and another migration.
Yeah, and God forbid they signed a contract, right? If they're on a service contract with the other company. So
exactly. And so
these
it ends up
pesky
being
contracts.
a conundrum. Yeah, they're contracts, man. Now, luckily, they have a little bit of an out because, at least some of the paperwork I've seen has stated GCC high, but in reality, when we look up their tenant, it's in GCC, and the SKUs are GCC SKUs. So just be really careful of that in your conversations, and maybe go check your portal and just confirm. The license will likely say GCC high next to it. Your tenant name will end in .us. There's a few, components there that you can check yourself to validate. But yeah, it's so crazy. Those calls are so sad to me because these are organizations that tried to do the right thing.
Right.
They tried.
And they literally got sold a bill of goods that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, man. But yeah, it's probably happened to me half a dozen, maybe a few more times than that. And I'm just one guy here. I know Steve and Kathy, who I work with, like both of them. I mean, I know they've seen it as well. So, I mean, we could be in the 20,
Kathy moved over to sales not that long ago, and she's already heard it, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Crazy.
There you go. So let's see here. Somebody was saying, well, we'll likely see international companies dropped off based on that FedRAMP issue. This is not helpful on generic, on our regular everyday calls. But the first thing that pops into my mind whenever I listen in on calls is, what do you mean we're going to see companies drop off because of the FedRAMP issue? The FedRAMP requirement has been a component of DFAR 7012 for 10 years. So it's this thing where like CMMC is constantly exposing the compliance and technical like regulatory debt that people have, where it's like, how many companies realize that they have to move to GCC high because they have ITAR requirements that they never thought about until they started looking into CMMC. CMMC does not require you to go to GCC high. Your export controlled information requires you to go into a sovereign cloud like GCC high. And I mean, I don't even know how many companies we talk to don't realize that until they start hearing and learning about CMMC. So yeah, the international companies dropping off because of FedRAMP. I mean, I'd love to get the DoD's take on that, because they're like, what do you mean going to drop off? Like, how are they doing it now?
Yeah. And that's the tricky part in all this is like, so many people come and say, oh, I have CUI. I'm like, well, you make weapons, right? Like I literally had this conversation with, I would call a top 5 weapons manufacturer. If I named them, you might have one of them in the closet, in your own closet. And I was having this conversation.
An M1 Abrams under the bed.
Yeah. I was having this conversation with them, and I could not get it through to them that they couldn't do this in Microsoft Commercial. And they're a US company. And so I was like, FedRAMP does not equal export control, does not equal US persons support staff. It doesn't at all. And a lot of people don't understand that. But the other side of it is they didn't think that ITAR had this requirement. Even though I pulled up PowerPoint slides and Department of State and the Federal Register and whatever, like they just couldn't get it. So I bring their trade compliance lawyer on the phone. I say, hey, bring him on and let me just sit down. Give me 90 seconds. I'm going to show him 2 things, and then I want to see what he says. So they brought him on the call, and this is the sad part. The guy comes on, and again, within like 2-3 minutes, he's like, Daniel's right. We have an active export here. We are in violation of ITAR, and we need to end this call right now and go figure it out.
Yeah, because that company name would be on like, this is like front page of like the New York Times like level.
Yes.
Company. Right.
Yes. And this is the problem.
International incident level company.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of my favorite sayings, a large enterprise, not in the weapons manufacturer, in the construction space. I went and did an on-site strategy engagement with them a year ago now, year and a half. And the PowerPoint slide they always put in front of every meeting, I thought it was hilarious. Don't do something that gets us in the news. Like that was like, they had like an OSHA brief on one slide, and then they had the don't do anything that gets us in the news slide on every PowerPoint slide. And it was
that,
so funny.
Is that famous like holiday weekend brief we would get in the military where they said don't add or subtract to the population?
Yes, it's the same thing. It's like, listen, we just want to coast here. We're going to be a neutral party in this. Don't do anything that rocks the boat. But the IT, and I'm beating that horse again, IT typically does not have a bridge or conversations with trade compliance, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Right. It's
well,
like
this is like classic consulting. You had the classic consulting situation where it's like, we're not even consulting. We're just on a discovery call where people are like curious about what's going on. And it's like, what is it? Consultants get paid to look at your watch and tell you what time it is. Be like, I talked to your own guy on a call. We're not even getting paid for the call.
No, we're just having a conversation. We're just trying to help in any way we can. My favorite quote is clarity is kindness. And it's like, we want to provide clarity where we can, not to berate people, but to try and help them understand, what they have to do, right? How do they protect this data, right? Because contractually they've obligated to this. ITAR has been around way, way longer than CUI handling requirements.
Talking Cold War era, terminology here.
Yeah. So anyways, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I had to get that off my head for some reason.
All right. Rich is on a roll here. I love the headshot, by the way, dude. So please explain the differences between 800.171 Rev 3 controls and CMMC practices. Okay, the easiest way to understand this is CMMC is a program that verifies existing requirements, right? So CMMC itself is not a set of requirements. CMMC is a verification program. It is an assessment program. It is an assurance mechanism that other requirements have been implemented. The 3 levels of CMMC correspond to which set of requirements you are trying to verify implementation for, because those set of requirements at each level don't inherently have a verification mechanism in them. So at level 1, you are talking about the requirements in FAR clause 52, 204, 21. 15 requirements. There is no requirement for a third-party verification at all. So if you're a contractor and you just tell the government we're complying with this FAR clause, they have no proof whether you are or not. Similarly, DFARS clause 252, 204, 7012 says when you handle a specific type of controlled data from the DoD, you got to comply with the documented requirements in NIST SP 800-171. You got to put our data in a FedRAMP equivalent cloud if you're going to do that. You have some incident response and reporting requirements if you deal with an incident. There is no mandatory verification mechanism for any of those things in that clause or any of those individual requirements. Similarly, you have a document called NIST SP 800-172, which is a set of enhancements for the requirements in NIST SP 800-171. Under the hood, they're both derived from NIST SP 853. So if you're a FedRAMP, FISMA, RMF, ATO type person, you're gonna recognize immediately what you're looking at. Even in 800-172, which is for the super duper CUI that the DoD really cares about, there is no requirement for mandatory third party verification. There isn't an assurance mechanism in those requirements. So stepping back, the DoD, for a lot of reasons, decided we want assurance that these requirements, when they apply, are being implemented. So they created the CMMC program as an assessment program to verify their implementation. So if you are only dealing with FAR 52, 204, 21, then you have to have CMMC level 1 to prove it. If you're only dealing with DFAR 7012, then you have to have CMMC level 2 to prove it. Depending on the nature of the business that you do, that might be a self-assessment or it might be a third-party assessment. Similarly, if you're dealing with the super whiz-bang stuff, as Stacy Bosjanek would say, you got to implement the requirements in NIST SP 800-172, which is verified by CMMC level 3. So the CMMC program is not the requirements verified by the program. There you go. That's the difference. And we're right at an hour.
That's right.
There you go. Good question, Rich. It's always I think helpful to explain the difference between the program and the requirements, because like we've talked about for an hour, like we've talked about for years, people say we're going to wait until we see the verification requirement to get started on the existing requirements that we designed the program to verify, which is why they created the program in the first place.
There we go.
So there you
what
go.
a way to go.
There you go. Okay. So if we didn't get to your question, apologies for that. We'll add it to the queue and then we'll keep on rolling. If you find this afterwards, you can always add your question or your comments in the chat. You can go to cuihotline.org. We have a real working phone number where you can leave your question over there. We have a form. If you've got a longer form question, you can fill that out on there, and then we will add that to the queue as well. That's really the best place for complicated scoping questions, because those are sometimes hard to just answer right on the fly. We try our best, but that's a good spot for it. CMMC Industry Week is next week with our very own Daniel Akridge. So check that out. Links in the comments. You can go to our website and find it out. Daniel's going to be posting about it. Register for that. Specialized briefs based off individual industries. So it'll be a little bit more relevant to what people have going on. Let's see what else. Chargers play the Eagles Monday night. Ooh. Justin Herbert has a broken hand, so who knows what's going to happen. And yeah, so there you go. We'll see you guys next week.
See y'all.